Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Alex, how are you this afternoon?
Good, thanks, Ted. Good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. I guess it's afternoon your time. It's morning here in the U.S., but I appreciate you joining regardless. And let's get you introduced. So you and I got connected on LinkedIn. I think, had some similar, I wrote an article about the Big Law 2.0 blueprint, and you had written an article somewhat similar-ish that we're going to talk more about in just a little bit. But tell our listeners kind of who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. So, I've been working for AI companies for about 15 years and accidentally fell into the legal world in 2018. Since that point, I've grown a number of legal tech businesses and more recently started working with law firms building products to distribute and sell to their clients. So most recently, as part of the Legal Tech Foundry, a new initiative that we launched at the start of this year, we help lawyers to build productized legal services. So we provide everything from the commercial expertise and experience to product development capabilities and, where required, introductions to capital.
Yeah, which is an option there in the UK with external capital with the Legal Services Act. Here in the US, it's still an emerging topic. We've got 2 states that have adopted alternative business structure rules, but we still have the ABA rule, Model Rule 5.4, that prevents non-legal ownership of law firms here for independence, to keep lawyers independent. So for people listening, I have a smirk on my face as I say that. I don't think that's why that rule exists at all. I think it's protectionist. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So, well, that's super interesting. So, the last time that you and I spoke, we talked about whether or not AI is a threat or an opportunity for legal. And the answer is it's both. It really depends on how law firms respond to this transformation. But we talked about boutique and specialist firms and how they might challenge big law in this transformation. Share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think personally, it is a massive opportunity for firms that can recognize it. And I think both big law and the more specialist firms have their own opportunities and challenges in realizing the potential of this new technology. Big law, of course, have the resources if they want to augment their delivery model to become more tech-enabled. They have the ability, if they wish to pursue it, to be able to start to invest significant resources into building productized solutions. But through that same lens, they also have the challenges of a partnership model and needing to get consensus to pursue this new direction of travel, if you will. And then on the flip side, looking at more specialist, more boutique firms, to a certain extent, if you're a specialist firm, you have already, to a certain extent, productized what you do. You provide a specific service to a specific type of client. It's just that you're currently providing the service through human capital, and there's an opportunity to again, augment your service into a tech-enabled delivery model. So I think that's obviously an opportunity for the more specialist firms that they have already, to a certain extent, productized. But at the same time, capital isn't quite as forthcoming for those organizations that may be turning over 5, 10, 50 million, for example. to be able to invest 1 or 2 million into this transformation, it's a much bigger lift for firms that are operating at those sort of revenue numbers as opposed to big law.
Yeah. And you mentioned the partnership model, and I've written quite a bit on the topic, and am a firm believer that the partnership model is an impediment. It's a big impediment, possibly the biggest impediment to this future state that we're heading towards, that nobody has control over. We're going there whether you like it or not. It's happening. And the challenge with the partnership model, there are many. You highlighted one: consensus driven decision making really makes things difficult because it's hard to get consensus on certain matters. You have interests that are not always well aligned. You have retirement horizons from people who make very logical decisions on their willingness to invest in a long-term solution that they might not be around for the break-even period. So, those are challenges. But another really big one is the partnership models that operate on a cash basis accounting prioritize short-term earnings, right? You're maximizing your year-end bottom line in these organizations, and where we're headed is going to require some capital expense and some R&D, and partnership models operating on a cash basis really aren't set up for that. The concept of R&D doesn't really exist in law firms. Do you agree?
Uh, I mean, you could look at the investment that firms are making into innovation teams. Number of firms already are building productized solutions, but I have also a certain amount of sympathy for everything you just mentioned, right? Like it's a big ask if someone is approaching retirement and effectively your ask is disrupt the entire business model and business that you might have spent your career or perhaps even a decade building. And added to that, if these senior executives within these law firms have um, earned a reasonable income over the last few years that they've been working and contributing to the firm, it's an even bigger ask because there's no monetary driver really that is creating this existential threat that they should go and facilitate and help facilitate this change. So I do have a certain amount of sympathy for the challenges that those firms and the partners in them face. I also have um, a huge amount of sympathy for those that are new partners in this model and believe that this is the future of law and this is the future of legal. But they're currently hampered to pursue that vision that they might have around how to deliver a better quality, better client experience to their clients.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. It is a big ask, but a necessary one. And how firms go about accommodating the scenarios that you describe is going to ultimately be the deciding factor on how much support they get, because it's not an easy, just abandoning an existing business model that's been very profitable and resilient for decades. I mean, big law has withstood so many potential disruptions. I remember when digital research came online, and that was going to completely change everything, and e-discovery and the cloud, and there's been a lot of disrupting forces making its way through the legal industry, but nothing like this. And it it's going to be interesting to see how these firms create a future state define a future state, and then map out a path to get from where they are today to that future state, I think that's where the success or the failure happens.
Agreed. And going back to what you were saying earlier, right? It's also to a certain extent how much they recognize that this is an opportunity and how willing they are to take action. And by take action, I mean invest in building for this future state, this and realizing this opportunity. Um, and just to tie this to some of what we've been talking about, if you as an organization, as a firm, as a full service firm, believe in this direction of travel, let's just put the partner consensus to one side for a moment. If you do believe in this direction of travel, you are effectively having to rebuild every practice area and every service that you provide to every different type of client that you currently service from the ground up. It's like trying to build 10, 15, 20, 50 startups all at the same time. Building one is difficult. Building 50, that's a huge lift, particularly for um, those that have very little experience in doing so. So I think this is where there is a potential advantage for the mid-market and SME firms, the specialist firms that focus on one very specific area. And if you think about like some of the most successful technology companies, I mean, where did they start? They started in very specific areas before they became the behemoths that they are today. Think about Airbnb and renting out rooms in San Francisco. Think about Uber and private limos. Think about Amazon secondhand books. They all start in a very focused and specific niche. So I think that's one of the challenges that big law faces, perhaps the biggest one.
Yeah. And there are some very big law firms here. I don't know if this is true in the UK, but here in the US, there are a few practice areas where you will get AmLaw sized firms that just really practice in one area. And maybe some
Yeah,
very closely aligned adjacent practice areas. Like a good example is labor and employment. So L&E here in the US, there's at least 5 or 6 firms with more than 600 attorneys. Several of them are clients of ours and great clients. Um, and I would say there's probably 3 or 4 that have over 1,000 attorneys that just do L&E work. Another area, intellectual property. You've got several intellectual property firms that are AmLaw level revenue, and they just really focus on one thing. But that's the exception to your point. Most of the AmLaw firms have a very wide breadth, and they practice in a number of areas. And to a large extent, that's been part of their selling proposition. Is we're a one-stop shop for your legal needs, and that comes with opportunities and challenges. Now we're starting to see, to your point, some of the challenges when you have to transform the business, and you've got all of these different practice areas that operate just like little businesses on their own. And in fact, I'd say even one level below that, the actual attorneys within the practice operate like their own little business on its own. They kind of have their own conventions. Many have their own model documents they use as starting points. They have their own conventions around how or how not they check documents into the DMS, how they write narratives. And I know there's been a lot of attempt in big law to kind of standardize some of these things, but I still see a lot of variability in that. So yeah, it definitely
yeah,
presents a challenge.
yeah. I would agree with that. And I think it's not to say that big law can't move in this direction. And I think for any full service firms that are thinking about this and thinking about this as an opportunity, you don't have to build all of those 50 startups all at once. You can dip your toe in the water and look for the lowest hanging fruit in relation to where productization really makes sense. Where can you deliver exponentially more value by bringing technology into this specific practice area or this specific service? And how does that enable you to capture more of the market or that market in which you're operating already? Or how does it enable you to provide significantly more value to that type of client for that type of service? That is a good starting point rather than trying to think about this as we've got to eat the entire elephant all at once.
Yeah, great point. I had an article. You made a comment on it, so I'm assuming you saw it just this morning about Big Law 2.0, which is essentially future state post AI. And one of the items that I outlined is like, all right, so what should firms be thinking about for the future? And it's really aligning incentives. I think was the first bullet in that, and that's reward fee earners for documented efficiencies and client facing innovation, not just hours billed. Like this almost has to be a combination of central expertise like knowledge management, innovation, and usually that's where AI lives, at least in the US. Those concentrated centers of excellence, and then on the front lines, the actual fee earners themselves, it's going to be a collaboration. The back office functions can't do it on their own, and neither can the front line in the practice. It really has to be a collaboration and a multidisciplinary effort in order to figure out how to do this effectively. Would you agree?
Yeah, completely. And there's two things. I mean, I picked up on something you said about two points on this. One is like, where does AI live? And I think um, I'm about to use the word historically, but we're talking about the last couple of years. So historically seems a bit grander term, but historically, I think AI has been looked at across the firm. What solutions can we procure that is going to help our organization? But the actual way in which AI is being used and the way that it can create value and the way it gets deployed is going to be dramatically different for an M&A practice as it is to an employment practice. So this is where I think there's perhaps more ownership that we're going to see from individual practice areas and business area owners around how they can utilize and build solutions specifically for the services that they're providing to clients of the firm. So I think for me, that's one question mark that I have in relation to how we're going to see AI ownership changing moving forwards. The other point I was going to say is that for anyone that is thinking about going on this journey, I think it's really about trying to identify that lowest hanging fruit, right? So where is there low margin work that is done to a degree of repeatability that ultimately can be productized? We shouldn't start trying to think about the most difficult problems to solve. The technology is capable of doing most of the things that a lawyer does, but the real challenge is trying to define the decision matrix and the judgment that needs to be fed into a system to be able to replicate the work that a lawyer is doing. And so if I was a lawyer at a firm and I was doing something over and over again, and there was an element of repeatability, and the market that I serve, not just the clientele that I have within my firm, but the market that I serve was big and broad enough that there was an opportunity to serve a much wider segment of the market by providing a tech-enabled service that is delivered at a much more efficient and effective rate to the end client, that's where I'd be thinking about, where should I be productizing? Where can I start this journey and then start to move up the value chain from there?
Yeah, it's a good point about the centralization versus, you know, kind of more distributed model. Here in the US, I don't know what the ratio is, but there are good chunk of firms who have KM attorneys aligned specific to certain practice areas, right? So you'll have labor and employment KM attorneys, right? They understand how the practice functions at a detailed level. And I think that model works really well because you kind of have one foot in both areas. You have one foot in the practice, and you have one foot in knowledge management and innovation. And bridging that gap is going to be key in figuring out a path forward and understanding all the nuance that has to be understood in order to have success.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the article that you wrote earlier today in relation to the investment that's going into KM and innovation versus profitability of the firms. Um, my comment to this was, is there enough being invested to make a material difference and impact in relation to the size of the firms in question? I don't know if you've got an opinion on that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I saw you post it and I haven't had a chance to respond. That is a really good question. So just to be candid, there are a lot of curveballs with this analysis. Like this was a very quick and dirty. I basically took the AmLaw 100 list and I had my assistant go in, and every firm in ILTA has a unique ID. I had her populate those unique IDs, and then I loaded the ILTA roster up in SQL and searched for any roles that had KM, innovation, or knowledge in the title. And I got a nice little count, and then plotted that out on a scatter plot and said, okay, is there a relationship between KM and I investment using headcount as a proxy, which I think is actually a pretty good proxy. Um, Law firms' biggest expense is people by a huge margin, and yes, there especially lately there is systems and platforms that um, require investment, but people have to manage, and you have to have someone there to help manage and deploy. So I think people are a pretty good proxy for overall KM&I investment. And there's so many variables to consider, including like sometimes firms engage in KM activities, but they call it something else. They'll call it practice innovation instead of KM or knowledge.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's so interesting. There is at some firms there is a cultural resistance to knowledge management. Like they don't want it called that, but they value the activities that take place in that function, so they call it something else. And it's above my pay grade to understand that dynamic. I really don't. Um, but it was really interesting to see that there is almost zero relationship between the size of a firm's KM&I team and their profitability. I naively went into it thinking there's got to be some correlation, and then after I saw it and I stared at it and I'm like, why is there not? It's like, duh, there's all sorts of reasons, but
Yeah.
your point,
Yeah, completely.
and you just pointed one out. I mean, that's a very fair assessment. I mean, all those firms are AmLaw 100, so they're going to have, so the AmLaw 100 ranges in revenue in the U.S. from about, at the high end, it's 7.5 billion. On the low end, I would have to say it's probably 700 million US. So yeah, there's a 10x variation in revenue from the top of the AmLaw 100 to the bottom. But it's
Yeah.
still in the real close to the billions. So anyway, yeah, that's a good point.
But I love the framework of the analysis that you've done there, and I think what what I started to think about when I read your article was, um, what is it that firms would require in order to capitalize on this opportunity? If again, they get over the partner consensus piece and they believe that this is the future of where their firm should be going. And I think the challenge for most is that they don't have sufficient resource to um, even dip their toe in the water in many instances, right? Like all all bar the biggest firms on the planet have significant internal development resources from a product development standpoint, right? Like AI analysts, technology teams that can actually build and develop applications. Um, they have a marketing function, which is great, but that marketing function is typically skilled and equipped to market a professional services business, not a software business, which is kind of what we're talking about here. So if firms are going on that journey or want to go on that journey, I think there's going to be significant investments that need to be made in order to conduct that. I mean, to your point earlier, R&D required to get them there. And once those new service models and products are developed, you then need the expertise to be able to sell those new services to your clients and beyond your clients to capture more of that market if that's the plan, which it is for most of the firms that are already going down this path.
Yeah, and while you were talking there, I looked and I was off by a couple hundred million. So at the bottom of the floor of the AmLaw 100, it's about 500 million. Things drop off quickly from in that bottom quartile of the AmLaw. That goes from, it's about a 20%, 30% drop. But anyway, your point about R&D and resources, what's interesting is, law firms historically have had, it's a foreign concept. There's not been, like, people are generally the I would have to guess that the KM&I teams at large law firms, their efforts aren't being and their expenses aren't being amortized over some useful life of whatever it is that they're working on. This is how it works in the US. So as a product company, any time that my team spends on product development, I have to bucket that separately than I do when they work on a client engagement where we're implementing or customizing for them. And that bucket of hours has to get treated as R&D, and we have to amortize the expense. So even though we're out of pocket $3 million in labor, I can only deduct, let's say, 300,000 of that each year, which really hurts me from a cash flow perspective because I'm paying tax on money that I've already spent, which is a real problem in the U.S. There's a lot of friction around this and how anti-innovative these rules are. Because as a product company, if I spend the money, I should be able to expense it. And Trump just extended what's called bonus depreciation or expanded bonus depreciation here in the U.S. It's called Section 179. But law firms don't do that. I would have to assume I've never or heard of a law firm that has allocated time, and I could be wrong about this, and if so, I'd love for my listeners to let me know, where the their employees' time is allocated in an R&D capacity where that expense is amortized over some useful life. It's possible, but it seems counterintuitive to me.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to begin to pretend to understand the intricacies of that and whether or not any firms have gone down that path. But I think what it does illustrate is an added layer of complexity to pursuing this direction of travel, which only goes to the reason why it is a hard path to go down. We're talking here about how accounting for your staff hours is different if you're going to go and build productized services. We've just talked about how you need to market and sell these new services in a different way. The need for different skills and expertise and experience to be able to go and create these new services. So it is a big lift, but that's why we believe that we want to provide that sandbox, that opportunity to dip your toe in the water, to make some of those low-hanging fruits a success, to showcase to the rest of the organization that this is possible, this can be done. And then our hope is that, like I said, that then opens up more opportunities to start productizing some of the more complex areas of the work that some of these firms are doing.
Yeah. And what's interesting is in the world of consulting, they have the same issue, right? They're under the same threats, and they largely operate on a cash basis. And they also, have consensus driven decision making to contend with, and they're also being completely disrupted by AI. I think it's been overstated, actually. I bang around on deep research across all the platforms a lot. It is such a fun. I really enjoy it. I use it to help prep for writing articles and it does some of the research work for me, and I can kind of pull it together. But yeah, consulting has these same challenges, and they're under a similar disruption. Um, so it's going to be
We
interesting to see how
we
they approach it.
well, we are. I mean, we are a consulting business, um, but we are eating our own dog food. So one of the things I spend quite a lot of time uh, working on with our clients is this a commercially viable opportunity? Should you actually go and build something in this space? You come up with an idea, and there have been a number of firms that I've worked with that have invested a not insignificant amount of money in building solutions before they've really truly defined the problem and the value of the problem and how much of the market is experiencing this problem, and frankly put together a really clear business plan around how we're going to create not just this product but this business, because it is a business in its own right. It's a startup within the firm. um, and so rather than in the traditional consulting way that this might be done, getting on a call, talking through some of these things, doing some workshops, trying to plan stuff out, we're productizing our own knowledge into a platform called Viable, which will enable a lawyer to come in and feed in their ideas, feed in their thinking, and in a structured way will help get them to a point of building out a business case in minutes rather than many, many hours of trying to think through and research the market around this particular problem and see whether or not anyone's already solved it. I'm still blown away by the number of people that come to us with an idea, and for a quick Google, you can already show them 5 or 6 solutions that already solve the problem for them. But I mean, back to the original point, consulting is being impacted. And that's exactly why we're building our own productized services so that we can make them more accessible to anyone that is thinking about going down this path.
Yeah, and you're rewarded for that. So, former consulting guy here, AcroWire is the predecessor company to Infodash. We were a time and materials consulting organization, and had we sold, we would have sold for 3 to 4 times EBITDA, basically net profit. And as a
Yeah.
product company, if we were, this varies based on timing, but right now the multiples are 5 to 8 times revenue. So to put that in perspective, let's say you're a $10 million company with 20% EBITDA. So you make $2 million a year bottom line, and you're a $10 million a year company. If you're a consulting company, you're going to sell for roughly $6 to $8 million. If you're a product company, you're going to sell to 50 to $80 million. That's quite the delta So there is a huge reward. And the reason is because you can scale product. It's really hard to scale people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, it starts to make that investment of 1, 2, 3, 5 million all the more attractive, right? If you can multiply the value of your business by 5 to 10x overnight, quite overnight, but you take the point. Um, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah. And a few $1 million is a drop in the bucket. I mean, that's nothing to get a startup off the ground. So, I think it's going to come down to like the blueprint article I wrote. I kind of just mapped out can't remember if I specified a number, but the thinking was take your existing legacy model, and that's what the current uh, law firm model is. It's legacy. Not everybody knows it yet, but it is. So take that legacy model and that's throwing off cash and set a portion aside to fund a completely separate entity, a C corp that doesn't have the partnership constraints, and fund the R&D to build the intellectual property needed to deliver services in a tech enabled way. And you can leverage your talent from your existing legacy business. You can leverage your capital and your market presence and your brand, your existing book of business. It's a great way. I mean, again, I did it with AcroWire to Infodash. I did the same thing. I essentially transitioned out of consulting and into product, and it worked out. It worked out really well. So there's a lot of parallels there. I'm a fan of the approach.
Well, Ted, you obviously had the foresight to do that. What were some of the challenges you had in making that transition?
Yeah. So, you know what? The biggest challenge working with law firms was their willingness to assign the IP. So, what we did was we started with a few of our existing clients and said, "Hey, look, we're going to build a product out of what we're doing for you, and we're going to give you a discounted rate to do it, but in return, you got to give us ownership rights over the IP." And that was such a hard sell. And it's why? Because this is what lawyers are trained to do. They're trained to there's a certain amount of chips on the table. I want as many of those chips on my side. And if I have more than you at the end, then that's a win. And the reality is I really had to appeal to logic. Like the GCs, they didn't get it. I had to appeal to my stakeholders on the inside and say, look, here's the advantage for you. Instead of starting, I'm going to use an American football analogy. Maybe it makes sense. Maybe it doesn't. Instead of starting 2 yards deep in your own end zone, I'm going to start you off on your opponent's 20-yard line. So you're going to get tremendous benefit from that, and you're going to help me shape the product. But you have to transfer ownership rights to me. That was the biggest challenge, and it was a big one. But we got through it.
Nice. Great. Any tips? Any tips to anyone that's thinking about pursuing the same path as
Yeah,
to how to navigate that?
that's a really good question. I would say that do things incrementally and have a really good plan on how you don't turn the lights off on your revenue hose too soon before your new business becomes revenue generating and can stand on its own. That is a tricky thing to do. Like we had legacy clients who weren't like in our wheelhouse, maybe smaller law firms or law firms that didn't want our new product for whatever reason. They love the custom dev stuff that we built for them, let's say. And but
Yeah.
eventually we did have to turn them off and just say, hey, we can't, if you're not leveraging our product, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't align with our current state. But doing that
Yeah.
too soon will really bite you.
Yeah. And I think you've touched on yet another challenge for lawyers, right? if you're busy working a 60 to 80-hour week and you've been trained throughout your career to avoid risk, and you've got this idea, but you're also aware of the fact that A, you've got no bandwidth because you're continuously delivering on the existing services that you're currently providing. But secondarily to that, startups are risky. They're a risky space to play in, right? I think it's something like less than 5% of startups actually succeed. So you've now got a time poor, risk averse individual that is looking at the opportunity of building a tech enabled service, effectively a startup, and scratching their heads about, should I really be doing this? Is this really where I should be playing? And I think we're going to see more and more people starting to recognize that the threat of inaction is greater than that of the risk of trying to pursue this new direction of travel. Maybe it will work out, maybe it won't. But even if it doesn't, you'll learn so much along the way that, um, frankly, for me, you have to go and explore, even in the smallest, even to the smallest extent, the smallest degree. And I think if you are thinking about this as an opportunity, you don't have to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars to go and explore what a new business might look like. You can do it far cheaper than that by talking to your clients about this idea, about this productized service, and take it from there. You'll get some great learnings just from having those conversations about whether or not this is something that you should go and pursue.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think law firms have a choice. I think that, and I'll tell you why. I talk to folks in the pricing world. I talked to a guy, a 25 year, God, maybe even 30-year vet. This guy's been around for a while. And he was telling me in law firm pricing, he was telling me how clients are now asking for, and I put it in the article about, they want a number. They want to know, how much did you save? How much time did you save working on my matters through the use of generative AI last quarter? And it's just like, how do you answer that question without at least starting to venture down the path that you just described? You can't stay still. If you stay still, you can't answer that question. And if you can't answer that question, you don't get the next batch of legal work from that client. I think they kind of have to start pushing in that direction.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. And I think for me, it's about at least like taking one step forward in that direction because, technology is eating lawyers' lunch. Already clients are using generic AI applications to draft letters, draft contracts, sending them over to their lawyers saying, hey, is this okay? Um, so technology is already starting to erode revenue streams. But the lawyers, they've got a number of things that are advantageous for them that most uh, startups in other industries don't have. They've already got a book of clients. They've got the domain expertise in a regulated and um, walled garden industry, right? But you've got to be qualified in order to practice. So not anyone can come and do this.
Barriers to entry.
All you've really got to, exactly, barriers to entry. You've got a moat already there. You've just got to take one step forward, start exploring what this can look like. And, all of the barriers that we've been talking about, they're not insurmountable. Um, if you don't have the expertise and experience and skills on your team, you can go and work with and find people that do. Come to us and we'll help you with this, right? So that's one contained way of being able to take a step in this direction. Partner consensus, again, it's not about getting consensus for the entire organization to completely rebuild itself and suddenly invest 50 or 100 million in building these 50 productized solutions. It's about trying to find the lowest barriers to entry, the biggest opportunities, the lowest hanging fruit to be able to just put one foot forward in this direction, prove that it can be done, prove that you can make a success of this. Because if you don't do that, your competitors will. And your competitors are no longer just other law firms that currently deliver the services that you deliver. It's those specialist firms that are thinking about productizing. It's other technology companies that are starting to move into this space because technologists have got a sniff of the fact that AI can come and do this work that lawyers currently do. And they're partnering with lawyers to be able to build these new productized solutions outside of the firm's environment. So I completely agree with you, Ted. Can't stand still. You're just moving backwards if you do.
Yeah, it's extremely risky. And, I do think too, and I know we're almost out of time, but I want to throw this one point out there. I am of the belief that off-the-shelf tools are great as a starting point, and they're a necessary step in the process. But in most scenarios, off-the-shelf tools, you're bringing your data to AI. And the reality is you have so much data as a law firm, you're going to need to bring AI to your data. And that's going to have to happen through tech investment and leveraging solutions like Azure OpenAI. I don't think that firms are going to be able to differentiate themselves with off-the-shelf tools. I think they got it. Their secret sauce. It's all those successful contracts you negotiated. It's the terms and the deals that made your clients successful on the other side of a transaction. That's going to be your moat. It's no longer going to just be your people and your brand, and your breadth.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, good. It's how do, as we wrap up here, before we do, how do people find out more about what you do?
Great question. Thanks, Ted. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. I put out some content around some of the stuff that we've been talking about today. Equally, if you want to drop me an email, I'm alex@legaltechcollective.com. And the Foundry that I mentioned earlier, which is the service that enables lawyers to productize their own expertise and services, that's at ltcfoundry.com.
I think you're going to be a busy guy here soon because I don't know anyone who's doing what you're doing, and there's a real need. Firms need help with this, and it's not an easy task, as you point out. So I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, Ted, and thank you for having me on today, and looking forward to coming back again at some point in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. It was great talking to you. Thanks, Alex.
Take care, Ted.
All right.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content.